Hi, I'm Jadam-san. Welcome back to another video, and today we're tackling personal unions in the EU5. We've just loaded up a game as Naples, and luckily Naples is the perfect example for this, because not only do they start with one major PU over Provence, but also two minor ones over Prato and Mondovi. And we start with a quick ability to get even more in terms of a easy CB on Albania right at the start of the game. So it's quite important, I think, to start by talking about the differences between personal unions in EU4 and EU5. In EU4, a personal union was more than just a marriage or a union. It was essentially a subject relationship, and more so than in EU5. You had any type of war, offensive, defensive, your personal union was there. You got a tithe from their economy, much bigger than the EU5, and you were able to use their claims for your war effort. Whereas EU5 has upended this system entirely. You've now got marriage unions, so essentially a glorified alliance between two partners of the same marriage that work together, but with no control over either nation. And your PUs fall in the same union, rather than being a consortium of separate unions under one name in EU4. As such, it becomes an international organisation, a new feature in EU5. This is often seen right at the bottom in your control groups. If not, you can find it by right-clicking on your union partner, going to Country panel, and looking in the top left here for your union panel. If it does get deleted as a control group in the bottom, you can quickly reinstate it by pressing Ctrl 5, the number of which control group you wish to set. This can prove a really useful way not just to organise your union or your international organisations, but your armies and your navies too. So how do we get these PUs or marriage unions in the first place? Well, it's mostly done through royal marriages. We'll touch on the specifics later, but the relevant way to do it for Naples is the old-fashioned way, like you would do in CK2 or 3, where if a country is struggling with its succession, for example, they don't have any male heirs or any heirs at all, then there's often a chance that you can get yourself in this picture. Often, you'll just randomly get PUs out of the blue, whereas you've been elected the ruler of a republic, say, or your brother's died without an heir, and you're just given Hungary, for instance, out of nowhere. And Naples is a perfect example for this. King Robert the Wise is the starting ruler of Naples and Provence. However, his two male heirs have both sadly perished before he's had the chance to pass on his realm to them. He's left with one living daughter. However, the Salic law succession law that Naples starts with prohibits the transfer of this title to female children, nor through them to their own sons. So what does this mean? This means that at the game start, Naples' current legal heir is the ruler of Hungary. Now, if he was to die prematurely, under these current laws, that would mean that Naples would fall in a union under Hungary. Now, just because Naples is the one going into the union with that king, doesn't mean that they will necessarily be the junior partner. In EU5, whoever is the senior partner is dependent on which nation is strongest in terms of their great power rankings. Now in EU4, if you've got a PU over someone who was vastly bigger than you were punching above your weight if you will, you might really struggle to keep them loyal or even integrate them. However, they didn't have the chance to take over the union in its entirety. In EU5, if you PU someone bigger than you, stronger than you, they can take over seniority of your union. And if you've got multiple people in that union, you can lose control of all of your PUs in one fell swoop. This is calculated through your great power score, so you need to ensure that you're working hard to keep your great power score up and ensure it doesn't fall behind your personal union partners, otherwise you're heavily at risk of this. So because of this fact, Naples gets an early event, the Will of King Robert the Wise, where you can choose between letting King Karoli of Hungary inherit, which sacrifices your nobility a bit, albeit not too much, and allows you to move into a PU of Hungary, which can let you take over the seniority of that union and become the head of that union yourself, or you can keep your provincial union and those Italian minors and change your succession law for free to cognatic primogeniture. You can also manually change your succession law by pressing the top left, the country tab, navigating to where you see your heir, and pressing the succession law button here. You can choose a different succession law, however, it will cost you 50 stability and 50 legitimacy. However, something to also note is that if you do change your succession law in the middle of a personal union, you will need to enforce this on your personal union partners. This is a diplomatic action and can be quite hard to get through. If you don't enforce this, then your partners will follow your pre-existing succession law, and if this is someone different to your chosen heir, you will lose your union to your previous heir. As my king has died after changing its succession law, we are now in a nobility regency, so we're waiting 5 years for our new heir to take the throne. If you're not happy with the quality of your incoming heir, you sometimes get opportunities to put your regent on the throne full time, or extend the regency for a couple of years so you can make the most of your regent's stats while they're still in post. You can do this in the top left and extend your regency for 5 years, but it does cost 20 legitimacy, and this is significant. To integrate your personal unions, however, you need to slowly progress towards centralization and remove your federal roots. The first step towards this is voting for established seniority in your Union Foundation tab. This sets the biggest partner by great power score in your union as a senior partner, and allows the progression of your other laws inside your union. This vote is then carried out within your union and is tallied up. Whoever has the most points between seniority and federal status or your other law that you're debating will win. It's also important to note that it's not just you that can start these law changes, it's your vassals too. So be careful, and if you're worried about an annexation being interrupted by a law change, which can happen by the way, you should quickly start a law proposal yourself, because only one law can be passed at a time. Quickly going back to what we spoke about earlier, this is a perfect example of the main way to get PUs, and that's royal marriages. My consort in this game is the heir to Croatia. So if Croatia's king was to die at the moment, that means that my husband would take the throne. What does this mean for us? So if he took the throne, whilst being our consort, that marriage doesn't go away. We'd quickly become a marriage union. So essentially a de facto defensive alliance, where our consort is the king of Croatia, and we stay the Queen of Naples. However, any illegitimate heirs between that union will then cause a PU if the same heir is decided to be formed between these nations when the heir takes command, and both members of the marriage union pass on. If this happens, that will form a personal union. However, the other main way of getting PU is to do it militarily. To get this claim throne CB, you need to first have a royal marriage, and a change of ruler needs to occur in that nation. So for example, we can do a royal marriage in my England game with 3 different countries: Luxembourg, Clan William, and I daren't try and pronounce that. But you should look to see which one is in the line of succession. For example, Pierre is second in line for throne, so he will have a direct claim, and we can use this to go for a claim throne war when the rulership changes in this county. Alternatively, if his older brother dies, he will be the natural heir, and you can also get a further marriage union and a PU that way, as we discussed earlier. However, it's also important to note there is a gigantic penalty to whether they accept this based on having a personal union and how many people are in that union. As you can see, we've got a negative 44 modifier due to the fact we're in a union and we're in a large one with Austria, Denmark, and Castile. The first law you can change in your Centralization tab is your codified inheritance law. You can only do this if your union has existed for 10 years. As you can see, seniority is passed. This means that we've been elevated to the senior partner of our union. However, this modifier here is one to be wary of. If you're on the wrong side of a vote between your union members and you lose 15% estate satisfaction for all the estates that oppose the resolution. So be careful and make sure you're on the right side and winning these votes. And for your union laws, you just follow down the same sort of pathway. To unlock economy of the union, your union has to exist for 20 years. For diplomatic liberties, it has to exist for 30 years, and you have to enact economy of the union. For legislature of the union, it has to have lived for 40 years, and you have to unlock the precursor with diplomatic liberties. And for the question of unification, your union needs to be around for 50 years, and you must have enacted legislature of the union. You can also unlock the mutual offence policy in your federal laws when you're 25 years into your union. However, this can be a bit of a poison chalice. Your options are a duty for offence, possible offence, or assured offence. Essentially meaning you'll range between you can be called to wars, you will be called to wars, or you're automatically called into these wars. This goes both ways. Unlike in EU4, where your PU is essentially a one-stop shop to being your vassal, in EU5 it's a partnership. So you can be called into the most random wars by your vassals, or well, not specifically your vassals, your personal union partners. if you're getting the gist. Which means that essentially, your plans can be upended by a random no-CB war when your provincial vassal wants to no-CB Aragon. Things like that do happen. So I definitely recommend the possible offence side of the tree. As long as your relations are high enough, you won't have any problems calling in your PUs anyway. However, going back a step, to summarise these previous options, Economy of the Union unlocks Unified Treasury, which gives a small tithe from your PU partners to you, if you are the senior partner of course. Diplomatic Liberties unlocks Unified External Diplomacy, which essentially means that they're diplomatically limited. There's not so much they can do without your approval or without just you doing it yourself. You also have Aligned Legislation, which essentially means they unlock the reforms and policies that you've done to min-max your nations as much as possible, so it's easier to transcend when they are integrated. And then we get onto the question of unification. Now, before we get onto the trials and tribulations of annexing your PU partners, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your support so far. We're making great strides, and I'm really working hard to improve the quality of the content and the information I'm able to give out to you guys. So if you wouldn't mind doing something in return, and lending your subscribe, or even turning on notifications, it all helps. This game is quite hard, and let's learn it together, so let's quickly head back to the video. So how do we unify our PU, annex our members, and speed up the annexation of our members? Well, within the question of unification, you have several options. You can go for a federal union, which is essentially just a glorified mini-alliance, where you get opinion and trust between your members, unification of crowns, which enables annexation, but it's quite slow, and then swift and rapid unification, which reduces the startup time to annex members, 10 at swift and 20 at rapid, which would take it down from 50, the base value, to 40 or 30, and speeds up your annexation of members. So if you adjust the base value of unification, you're at speed of 1, whereas rapid is 2. So you're going double the speed, and you're able to do it much faster. So how do we speed up the annexation of our vassals and our PU partners? Well, there's a really good tech to start with in the Age of Renaissance. The title is Consolidation Tech, which gives you a 10% debuff. But the big values in here is cultural and size-based. If you have your union, as we spoke earlier, you can double the speed through that. But however, you have some huge multiplicative effects that ride off that. For example, size, Vladimir in my Muscovy game is much smaller than me, hence I can integrate them very fast, and we share the same culture, and our culture is dominant over theirs, which increases it by 100% again. That is a huge buff, and means that we're going to be integrating them very fast. However, one thing to note is, if they fall below the required opinion, which is 150, that integration will stop, it won't cancel, but you will need to improve your relations again before it starts ticking along again. Just to recap on what we mentioned earlier though, if someone was to start a vote for Federal Union, whilst we're mid-annexing one of our PU partners, and it was to pass, you would completely stop your annexing process. So say you're England, you've been trying to annex France, and you're 200 years into annexing such a large country, and a vote was started, and you lost that vote because your PU was too big. The Federal Union, you would completely lose all of your unification progress, and that would probably lead you to quitting the game. So make sure you've got sufficient balance within your PUs that you don't have this eventuality. Starting annexation, however, does come with a few little debuffs. Monthly diplomats, antagonism increase, and your subjects' opinions do change. Be aware of this. If you're not in the same culture or in the same cultural group, you need to improve your cultural relationship. How do you do this? Well, it's a simple diplomatic action that you can do. Ask to improve cultural opinion. This will increase the rate that you can annex because your cultures will like each other more. It's just a simple action that requires one diplomat. However, it does require 50 favours. So you might have to curry favours for a while to get this, but it's absolutely worth it. Finally, the last mechanic you need to be aware of is if you have an inconsistent integration level. This is, for example, what would happen if you've had a PU going for a while and you've just added a new member to the union. So how do you get this new member up to the same standard? You call your PU parliament. This is where you summon their estates essentially, and you bribe them off to make sure that they agree to come up to your integration level. Now you'll still have to wait the time limit, for example, if you want to annex them. If you've got to rapid by now, however, it could be a minimum of 30 years, which in this grand scheme of things isn't that bad. But they have to be the same integration level as everyone else to start annexation. So thank you so much for watching, and I really hope this answers some of your questions. If you've got any more, please put them in the comments, and I'll try to help where I can. Also, if you've got any tips for newbies, we're all learning this game together, so chuck them in the comments, discuss them, and help other people out. Do let me know what topics you'd like to hear from next. Have a bloody brilliant day.